How about we build some more 2x4 projects? So let's begin. For number one, we're going to need one 2x4, but also try to get one that has as few of knots in it as possible. If it has a few small ones in it, probably not big a deal, but if you see a bunch of large ones, try and get another board. You will need to cut out two boards at 10.5 inches, two boards at 12 inches, and two boards at 14. Before we start building, we still need to make another cut on these 14-inch boards. We need to do a 45-degree angle on each side. They will be perpendicular to each other, or if you were to draw straight lines, they will eventually intersect with each other. So perpendicular cuts, 45-degree angles on each side. Now this project will be going in my garage, but if it goes anywhere else in your house, this will be the time to sand off some of those factory markings so it looks a little bit nicer. Next, grab one of the 10.5 and one of the 12-inch boards, and we want to connect those together in like a corner with the 10.5 sitting on the side of the 12. And to do that, we're going to put some pocket holes in the back of this so it'll attach nice and tight. With the 10.5 and 12 now in position, we want to grab that 14-inch board with the two angles on the ends, and we want to position it right underneath. And it should line up with all the cuts, but if it doesn't, let me show you how to fix this. While holding this in position, you'll see right over here, it's a little hard to see, but there is a gap. So one of two things happen. Either I didn't cut these at the top at 90 degrees exactly right, or I didn't cut these on the ends exactly at 45. So two ways to fix that. One, you can always go back and retrim this one side, just removing just an ever so slight amount of wood to get that correct angle so it'll line up. Or you could potentially put a clamp between both of these ends and pull them in. That is up to you. Now, I personally prefer just to trim off a little bit more of the wood to get the correct angle so that we don't accidentally deform the top of the piece. And now that looks much better. And since we're using pocket holes already, let's use them again to attach this right there in the middle on both sides. And once you complete that first one, then just repeat the process so that you can have two identical pieces. And just in case you haven't guessed it already, these are mounting brackets to go up on your wall so you can put up some nice heavy-duty shelves. And as long as you find the studs going into the wall, you should be able to put a decent amount of weight on these without any issue. For project number two, let's make something the whole family can enjoy. And you're gonna only need one board. You'll need two boards at 14 inches, two boards at 11 inches, and 9 at 3.5. At this point, if you want to remove any of the factory marks, this will be the time to sand them off. Next, we want to configure the 11 and the 14 into a box. So make sure you have the 11 opposite of each other and the 14 opposite each other. And the 14 will actually squeeze on the ends of the 11. We want to make sure that everything on this end is nice and flush, and then we're just going to put a couple screws going in on each side because this is not going to support any weight, so we don't have to worry about this being structurally strong. You also may want to pre-drill the holes on the ends so we can prevent cracking in these outer boards. At this point, if you want to give your box and your blocks a shot of color, this will be the time to do it. It'll also help protect the wood so it doesn't discolor as we touch it, or if you leave it outside, it should help it as well. And once you get that shot of color on your blocks, you can now put some X's and some O's on them. There'll be one more X than there will be O's because X always start first. And if by chance you're interested in getting these kind of lettering, I will put a link to those in the description. Now don't be surprised if you use spray paint like I did that some of these turn out much better than others. It will happen. But these are going to be played with, so as long as they look decent, they don't have to be perfect. Also remember, you're going to have 5 X's and 4 O's. Now when it comes to your frame here, there's two things you can actually do with this. First, you can actually apply a backing, and that could be thin plywood or maybe even cardboard, or you can leave it open just like this. So that way when you're playing and you're done, you just lift it off, move everything out of the way, and you can play again. That is totally up to you. I like the idea of keeping it open. It just makes it quicker and easier to start a new game. Now if you choose to add a backing onto this, a lot of times it would be hard to reach in and pull out pieces individually, but I left just enough room so that you can go in here and easily pull out whatever piece you want one at a time, just in case you put it in the wrong spot. Now I hope this gives you a good excuse to go have fun playing with your family. For project number 3, I'm gonna get a total of 4 boards. Now you could probably play with the sizes a little bit and get away with 3, but I'd rather have the extra and use that towards a future project than not have enough. And for this project, I suggest using a sliding miter saw because we're gonna make some angled cuts on the ends of some long boards and not your standard angle cuts either. So therefore using a circular saw, well, it could be a little bit dangerous, and trying to use a table saw, well, that can be very cumbersome because we're trying to move around a very long board. That's why I suggest using a sliding miter saw if you have one. Also, make sure you pick out the best boards that you can. If you have any major cracks or splits or little pieces missing like this, that could be a problem with this setup. So avoid those if you can. For our first 2 boards, we have to keep these at 8 feet long. Yes, that's gonna be a little challenge to work with, but that's what we're keeping them at. We need to cut some angles on the end, so I've just temporarily kind of angled them a little bit towards each other so I don't get these mixed up. We need 45-degree cuts that are opposing each other. So we're going to take a speed square, put it right there on the end and do a line, and then flip it over and do a line, and then we can cut those angles out knowing exactly which side is which. Now that I have these angles cut, I need to determine which one of these I need to have on the front and which one I'm going to have on the back, because I'm not going to join them together face to face like that. I'm actually going to go in here and do some half laps. That's why I suggest using a sliding miter saw for this setup. So we need to figure out which one's the front, which one's the back. I think I'm going to make this one the front. So we're going to have to flip it over and we'll cut out this back side here, versus on this one we'll cut out the front side. Now let me show you a quick way to determine how far we need to cut this down. We know that the thickness of these boards are 3.5, and so we're going to take our speed square we used earlier. We're going to put it right along this edge we just cut, measure down 3.5 inches and make a mark. Then we're going to flip this over so that the back side here, this angle, is going to be at the same angle that we just cut, and then we can use that mark we did to make a line. And that is how much material we need to remove. Just repeat that on the other board as well. Next, we need to determine how far down we need to remove material. And to do that, I grab one of those cutoffs we did earlier, and with a quick measurement, it should be 1.5, and it is. So now we're going to use that to measure 3/4 across, which 3/4 is half of 1/2. We're going to make a mark on the wood, and we're going to use this as a template to set up our sliding miter saw. Now we need to look at our sliding miter saw. We need to find the depth gauge on it, and mine just happens to be right here. If we loosen this lock and now twist this knob, this will adjust how far the blade is limited to going down. So we need to now find the mark here on this wood, put it in place, and then lower the blade so that the bottom of the blade is right at that mark, and then lock our limit in place so that it won't go any further down and we can make a bunch of cuts. Now before we start making our cuts, you need to get another piece of wood, pretty small. This is just a furring strip, something along that size, and you want to position it behind the board. And the reason why is if we don't, the back side of this blade is going to create a curved surface on the back of this board here. By spacing that furring strip in between there, it spaces it out just enough so that the blade makes a nice flat cut all the way across the board. It's also a good idea to clamp that piece of wood down that's behind the board so it doesn't move around as we slide this one back and forth. And when you're done, you should have a cut halfway through the wood that goes all the way to the end here. Now you'll probably have to go back and use some sandpaper to sand some of these ridges down. That's normal, but it should look something like that. And then you can just repeat that same process on that second board. And once you have both of them cut, you can overlap the tops and stand them up. But as you can tell, these things are about 7.5 feet tall, and that is quite large for my shop. So I made a miniature version for you, which will make it a lot easier for you to see, and I'll base everything off of this smaller one, even though it's going to be built for the larger one. Now looking at the smaller pieces here, I've actually went ahead and took the next step, but let me show you exactly what I did. On the bottom down here on the larger boards, they come to the factory cuts, which will be this angle here, and if we were to set this on the floor, it'll be sitting right on this corner and this corner. So I went in and I removed both of those so it'll sit nice and level on the ground, just like that. And to do that, we're gonna have to cut this at 22.5 degrees. Once we have both ends cut, we need to temporarily put it together because we need to check for overlap. Probably a good idea to clamp it so it doesn't move around on you. If your top here actually protrudes out a little bit, we can sand that down. If it actually sits in too much, then we need to go back and make another small cut here so that it'll be nice and flush. Once you get both sides pretty close to flush, we can move on. Once the top fits together well, and the base is nice and level with the ground, we need to either glue or screw the top together. I personally am going to glue it together because I think it'll look a lot better without having any screws being visible. Next, we need to look to the bottom of the legs here. This small version is only about 1.5 feet tall and does pretty good standing up on its own. But if you add another 6 feet to this will be really top heavy. So we need to work on a base for both of the legs. And to do that, you're going to need 2 boards at 24 inches and 4 boards at 15. And from here on out, I'm just going to call this an arch just to make it a little bit easier to identify. Now I've placed the arch in the center of the 24-inch boards, trying to keep them as parallel as possible. If I was to attach it just to these, there's a good chance if I use screws or glue, something might break. So I want to create some additional supports, some additional legs that kind of come down at an angle, and I think that'll give it a lot more strength. But heads up, because this is where it's going to get a little bit tricky. If we just cut an angle on the bottom and an angle on the top, the board is going to stick way out here. And you see how that's not even close to the angle of our arch here? So in addition to flattening it out for this board, we have to angle it way in. So we're going to have a compound cut down here with 2 separate angles. So on the top up here, we're going to have just a 45-degree cut. And on the bottom, we're going to have 45 degrees plus 22.5 degrees. Let me show you how to set this up on a miter saw. Let's first make the easy cut, which is the 45 degrees. So we're just going to turn the bottom of our saw to the 45 degrees and make that cut. For the cut on the other end, there's a couple ways you can actually do it on a miter saw, and it also depends on which way your blade will actually lean. I'm going to show you the way that I like to do it on this particular saw. I'm now going to adjust this so I can flip it around all the way to the 45-degree mark on this other side. Then I have to loosen the top of this saw so I can rotate it to 22.5 degrees. And then tighten it back up. Then I'm going to take this piece of wood and I'm going to flip it inward and then flip it over. So now we can see that line we drew earlier, but I can also see this corner edge, and that's important because that's what we're going to line this blade up to. One huge word of caution here: whenever you're making a compound cut like this, your wood's going to want to move around even more than it normally does. So make sure you either clamp this down or hold it down really tight so it doesn't move. Also make sure your hands are far away from that blade, just in case it does move around, it doesn't suck your hand in. Next, line up your blade with that line that we made earlier. And you want to try and get the blade as close as you can to this edge or this corner without coming over, or you're going to shorten it. So get it right up to the edge of that corner and make your cut. And now for the moment of truth, let's see if this will fit. Remember, the standard 45 will go on the top up here, so just kind of get it somewhat in alignment. The compound will go towards the bottom, and it should fit together something like that. If it's not perfect, maybe you had one of your angles a little bit off when you were cutting it, that's okay. We have some extra wood. You can always recut one if you need to, but it should fit together about like so. It's now time to cut 3 more pieces, and your second one will look identical to your first one, so you can leave all your settings like they are and make that cut. But we can't have all of them identical, because if we did, this will be way off. So we need to cut 2 more boards that are mirror images of this one. In other words, instead of having the angle cut at 22.5 degrees this way, we're going to have to cut it this way. So make sure you adjust your measurements when you're doing that. Once you have everything cut, space your base boards out so they're nice and even and parallel with each other. And then take one of your boards and line it up on one side and one on the other. Make sure they're the mirror ones. And just adjust it until you can get everything lined up between the two. And if we can get it just right, it should fit something like that. Now, of course, if it's a little off, you can always go back and readjust the angles that you have down here to make it fit, but it should look something like that. Now to attach these boards, there are a couple ways you could do it. You could always glue it together, but that's going to take some time to dry and it's going to be difficult to clamp it together. Also, you can use screws, which I think will be the way I'm going to do it. But if you notice, if I screw in one side, then you'll have the screws showing from the outside. I'd like to keep the screws somewhat hidden. So I think on the back side back here, since it's leaning in, I think I'm going to put some pocket holes and add some pocket screws. But that is totally up to you. Now once you have everything cut and shaped and tested and make sure it is exactly where you want it, it's time to take all this back apart and start sanding. We need to sand off all the factory marks and any major imperfections so it'll look nice and smooth, and then you can paint it or stain it. Let me get that done and I'll show you the final result. And here is the final result. This is great for a wedding or maybe for a college or a high school graduation. You're trying to do poses and different photography, and just it's a great backdrop, especially if you put some flowers, maybe some curtains or something along this to really make it stand out. It's really simple to put together. Now with those legs on there, even if it got bumped pretty hard, it's stable. So, hope you like it. And there's 3 more great projects for you. If you can think of any improvements, please list those in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. Plus, you'll help out a ton of other people. Otherwise, get out in your shop and have fun building.